Grant versus Lee. In the spring of 1864, the most successful general of the Union Army faced the most renowned Confederate commander. Ulysses S. Grant put his most trusted subordinate, William Tecumseh Sherman, in charge of operations in the West. He then headed to Washington, D.C. to take command of the Union troops facing Robert E. Lee. From the Wilderness to Cold Harbor. The first battle of Grant's campaign erupted in May in the wilderness of a densely forested area near Fredericksburg, Virginia. Intense fighting lasted 2 days, continuing after the woods caught fire. Despite suffering heavy casualties, Grant attacked again near Spotsylvania Courthouse. The two armies battled for 18 days, often in bloody hand-to-hand combat. Unlike past campaigns in which several weeks of reinforcing and resupplying followed battles, warfare now continued without pause. Savage combat, advances and retreats, and the digging of defensive trenches filled most days and nights. Unable to break Lee's lines at Spotsylvania, Grant headed toward Cold Harbor, a strategic crossroads northeast of Richmond. Grant decided to launch an all-out assault at Cold Harbor. The attack cost his army 17,000 casualties compared to 1,500 of Confederate forces. The Siege of Petersburg. Stopped by Lee at Cold Harbor in June, Grant ordered General Philip Sheridan to stay a cavalry raid north and west of Richmond. While Sheridan's troops distracted Lee, Grant headed southwest across the James River, and then turned west toward Petersburg. Capturing Petersburg would cut an important railroad line into Richmond. When the first Union troops reached the outskirts of Petersburg, they paused. The city was defended by miles of barricades 20 feet thick. In front of the Confederate trenches were ditches up to 15 feet deep. Carefully positioned cannons supported Confederate lines. The strength of the defenses that the Confederates had erected at Petersburg intimidated the Union troops, who were already exhausted. Realizing a full-scale frontal assault would be suicidal, Grant ordered his troops to put the city under siege. While Grant fought Lee, General Sherman marched his army from Chattanooga toward Atlanta, and the Union Navy prepared to sail the last major port of the Gulf of Mexico east of the Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama. On August 5, 1864, Admiral Farragut took 18 ships past the three Confederate forts defending Mobile Bay. As the fleet headed into the bay, a mine, which in the existence was called a torpedo, blew up a Union ship. The explosion brought the fleet to a halt right in front of the fort's guns.
Sherman's March to the Sea. In late August 1864, Sherman sent his troops south around Atlanta to cut the roads and railways leading into the city. After occupying Atlanta, Sherman proposed to march across Georgia. He ordered all civilians to leave Atlanta. To end the war, he believed he had no choice but to make old and young, rich and poor, feel the hard hand of war. Sherman then ordered his troops to destroy everything of military value, including mills, factories, railroads, and warehouses. The fires intended to destroy these structures quickly spread, burning down large portions of the city. On November 15, 1864, Sherman began his march to the sea. His troops cut a path of destruction through Georgia that was in places 60 miles wide. They ransacked houses, burned crops, and killed cattle. By December 21, 1864, they had reached the coast and seized the city of Savannah. After reaching the sea, Sherman turned his troops north and headed into South Carolina. As the troops marched north, they pillaged and burned many towns, including Columbia, the state capital. Sherman's march demoralized Southerners. The South surrenders. When Sherman and Grant began their campaigns in the spring of 1864, Lincoln knew that his own re-election depended on their success. He did not know, however, that the war was nearly over. Only a few months later, the Confederacy was on the verge of collapse. The election of 1864. To challenge Lincoln in 1864, the Democrats nominated General George B. McClellan. Knowing the country was growing weary of the war, McClellan pledged to negotiate a ceasefire if the Confederacy agreed to rejoin the Union as part of the negotiations. However, the capture of Atlanta came just in time to revitalize Northern support for the war and for Lincoln, who won re-election with 55% of the popular vote. Lincoln viewed his re-election as a mandate to end slavery permanently by amending the Constitution. On January 31, 1865, the 13th Amendment banning slavery in the United States narrowly passed the House of Representatives and was sent to the states for ratification. Surrender. On April 1, 1865, Union troops led by Sheridan cut the last railroad line into Petersburg and the Battle of Five Forks. The following night, Lee's troops withdrew from their position near the city and raced west. Lee's desperate attempt to escape Grant's forces failed when Sheridan's cavalry got ahead of Lee's troops and blocked the road at Appomattox Courthouse. When his troops failed to break through, Lee sadly observed, "There is nothing left for me to do but go and see General Grant, and I would rather die than 1,000 deaths," Lee said. With his battered troops surrounded and outnumbered, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. Grant's generous terms of surrender guaranteed that the United States would not prosecute Confederate soldiers for treason. When Grant agreed to let Confederate soldiers take their horses home to put in a crop to carry themselves and their families through the next winter, Lee thanked him, adding that the kindness will do much toward consolating our people. Lincoln's assassination. With the war over, Lincoln described his plan to restore the Southern states to the Union. In the speech, he mentioned including African Americans in Southern state governments. One listener, the actor John Wilkes Booth, sneered to a friend, "That is the last speech he will ever make." The president's advisers repeatedly warned him not to appear unescorted in public. Nevertheless, on the evening of April 14, 1865, Lincoln went to the Ford's Theater with his wife to see a play. During the third act, Booth slipped quietly behind him and shot the president in the back of the head. Lincoln's death shocked the nation. Aftermath of the Civil War. The North's victory in the Civil War strengthened the power of the federal government over the states. It also transformed American society by finally ending the enslavement of millions of African Americans. At the same time, it left the South socially and economically devastated. Following the war, many questions remained unresolved. Americans from the North and the South tried to answer these questions in the years following the Civil War, an era known as Reconstruction.
The Reconstruction battle begins. The large area of former Confederacy lay in the ruins. The South economy was in a state of collapse. The value of land had fallen. The Confederate money was worthless. Roughly two-thirds of the transportation system no longer functioned. Dozens of bridges had been destroyed and miles of railroad that were useless. Most dramatically of all, the emancipation of African Americans had thrown the economic system into chaos until the South adjusted to this new reality. It could not maintain its agricultural output. Meanwhile, the President and Congress faced the difficult task of reconstruction or rebuilding after the war. Now, the Lincoln's Plan. In December 1863, President Lincoln offered a general amnesty or pardon to all Southerners who took an oath of loyalty to the United States and accept the Union's proclamation concerning slavery. When 10% of a state voted in the presidential election had taken this oath, they could organize a new state government. Certain people, such as foreign Confederate government officially and military officers, could not take the oath or be pardoned in March 1865. In his second inaugural address, President Lincoln spoke of ending war with malice toward none, which utterly for all. President Lincoln wanted a moderate policy to reconcile the South with the Union instead of punishing it for treason. The Radical Republican. The more radical Republican in Congress quickly resisted Lincoln's plan, led by the Representative Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania and Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. The Radicals did not want to reconcile with the South. They wanted, in Stevens' words, to revolutionize the Southern institutions, habits, and manners. Republicans knew that once the Southern states were restored to the Union, the South would again about state in the House of Representatives. Before Civil War, the number of Southern seats in the House was constitutional. According to this compromise, only 3/5 of this enslaved population counted toward representative. The abolition of slavery entered the South endangered Republican control of Congress unless Republicans could find a way to protect the voting rights of African Americans.